contact with inhabitants of other worlds. In my Father's house. Countless heavenly bodies circle the universe, and they all have the task of helping immature souls reach maturity. So now you can understand the words, "In my Father's house are many mansions." And every star receives the souls whose state of maturity is suitable to its conditions. In other words, the potential for maturity differs on every star and the souls are placed accordingly. But the living conditions, too, are always different, because the star's nature and consistency vary. A detailed description cannot be given to people on Earth because much would be incomprehensible to them and requires spiritual knowledge in order to be understood. But for all souls, whatever their degree of maturity, suitable stars exist for maturing, where souls of goodwill are able to ascend. For even there the spiritual being's free will is taken into account, even the spiritual constraint is not applied, although the respective living conditions constrain the beings to the extent that they have to accept them or they could not survive in their world. And everywhere the beings will receive a light which reveals the purpose of their existence. Whether they accept and utilize the light is up to them, but it is decisive for their ascent. And all these works of God's creation are mansions in the Father's house. Hence all spiritual essence will one day achieve the degree of maturity which will enable it to exchange physical creations with purely spiritual ones, which you humans are unable to perceive with your physical eyes. Because everything that is visible to you are creations which shelter beings which are still immature, since perfected beings are active in the kingdom of light and no longer require visible creations for their abode. But the distance between all these works of creation is vast and they are not within reach of each other either. The inhabitants of all these worlds are tied to their planet, to the star on which they live. They are only able to change their abode after reaching a certain degree of maturity. And not arbitrarily but in line with God's fundamental law, to which all His creations must submit, including the beings who are allocated to them. It is therefore foolish to assume that the inhabitants of these worlds could arbitrarily depart from them and approach other worlds without fearing their own destruction. Because the living conditions are different on all stars and these cannot be excluded arbitrarily. However, during the last days even such plans are being worked on. God's opponent takes advantage of people's gullibility by feigning that they can have contact with inhabitants of other worlds and that these, for apparently good reasons, also want to make contact with the inhabitants of Earth. He intends to undermine the belief in an end of the old Earth and thereby prevent people from preparing themselves for this end. But people should be informed that Earth is a planet on its own which has no connection with other worlds, and that any connection with other worlds can only be spiritually established. Hence the human being is, in fact, able to make contact with inhabitants of advanced worlds, with the kingdom of light, by way of good and appealing thoughts for help at times of spiritual hardship, which will then be given to him spiritually, but that it is not advisable for him to call on beings on other stars whose spiritual degree of maturity and their ability to offer spiritual help is unknown to him. Physical help is definitely out of the question, as God's adversary would like people to believe that these beings could exert their influence on the inhabitants of Earth before a final destruction. Only God can provide the right kind of help when the time arrives which is feared by you humans. And if you believe it, He will grant this help to everyone who asks for it. And He truly has enough angels who exclusively comply with and implement His will, and they will also take care of people when the hour comes. But God's adversary has found fertile ground in people's gullibility onto which he can sow many bad seeds. people would rather accept his misguided instructions than pure truth, which shows the value of his seeds. Because error is always accepted over truth, the human being will always seek to gain advantage from error and reject the truth, which does not promise him many profits. The end is near, and it will come without fail. Every teaching is wrong which questions an end or provides people with a way out that does not correspond with God's will. For God himself will lead everyone out of danger who entrusts himself to him, who takes refuge with him, who belongs to his own, who need not fear an end. Amen.